Welcome to Getting to Know UBC in this new normal that we are experiencing and walking through. Our first ever video guest is Canaan Crane, and we're going to get to know Canaan today. Canaan, as we start out, if you could just kind of give me your journey in life up to this point. Where were you born and raised? How did you get to Shawnee? And just kind of share some of those things.
Sure. Yeah, so born in Oklahoma City, actually technically in Bethany, and was there for until through through fourth grade, and we moved out to the Mustang, Yukon area, and so I graduated from Mustang High School a long time ago, and then came to Shawnee for to come to OBU. Came initially as a music major, and ended up switching for a brief time to business, and then finally found what I think was some of my calling, which was family psychology. I met Stephanie, my wife, during that time. Actually, our freshman year we met. We didn't start dating till our sophomore year. Stayed on for grad school at OBU, and then was working in an agency in Choctaw. Stephanie was substitute teaching at Shawnee Public Schools for her first year, and then got a full-time job at Tecumseh High School teaching English. And so I had several jobs through that time, sold furniture at Neil's, and ended up coming back to work at OBU as the director of student services, responsible for career counseling and the mental health counseling, campus nurse, disability services.
A position once held by another member of University Baptist Church, correct?
Yeah, so Bobby Canty, actually, when he became the dean of students, I took his position as director of student services. So he was my first OBU boss. And then I became full-time faculty at OBU in 2007, and I've been doing that since then. Finished PhD, and I'm the director of the graduate program in marriage and family therapy. So I teach marriage and family therapy classes, psychology classes at the undergrad level, and randomly a couple of rock climbing classes as well.
Where did the rock climbing desire come in? Was that after you'd been out of college, or is that something you've always done?
Yeah, so like growing up, I remember a youth pastor took us to the Illinois River and slung a rope up on a crumbly cliff, which now, knowing what I know now, was one of the most dangerous things he could have done. And
Right.
we just rappelled off of it. And I was probably 14. I bought my own rope. I bought my harness, and so I spent a good portion of my adolescence and young adulthood finding random objects to rappel off of. So some of which were probably closed access things that we won't talk about, but you know.
All right. There's a statute of
luckily,
limitations, I'm sure we're fine.
yes, well, yeah, and my wayward ways are gone for the most part. And so yeah, so then when I actually, it was probably sometime in my time back at OBU, we were out rappelling at Robbers Cave, and I saw some climbers, and I sat and watched them. And as I watched them, I really got intrigued by what they were doing and how much more intelligent it seemed than what we were doing, which was just going down. Going down isn't really hard, but going up is a whole different kind of experience. And so read some books, started climbing more as a gym, put together a class, helped design the rock wall
Right.
at OBU, and so.
Cool. All right. So in other journeys, and you mentioned it a little bit there in your just biographical journey, but what about faith? You talked about the role of a youth minister in the rock climbing, but I'm sure that had other impacts as well, and maybe with that. And just as a side note, the idea of descending being easier than ascending, I'll steal that for a sermon someday. So that's
Okay, cool,
we're
good.
gonna get that illustrated.
If you need somebody to rappel off the balcony as
Oh,
a demonstration, I'm sure I can convince Mike Ashley to do it.
I think that would be great. I think that would be great. Yeah. So faith
Uh,
journey. What does that look like?
Yeah, so for me, grew up in church. My dad was a single parent, and I remember, early on going to church regularly. I do remember the laying in my bed one night and asking my dad, interestingly, I was asking what the Salvation Army was.
Mm.
And so he was explaining some of what they do and talked a little bit about salvation. And I remember that kind of as a first kind of moment that connected with some of the things I've been learning at church about, my brokenness, my lostness, and the importance of, what Jesus would do for me. Um, so, yeah. I know we're
Okay.
having a little bit of connection issues, but we
Oh,
get back. Are we good now?
yeah, I hear you fine. I haven't lost you a bit.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I think for me, being involved in youth ministry at my church, growing up helped grow me a lot. And so when I came to college, I actually came as a music minister and was going to pursue a calling to the music ministry. It was
Mm.
particularly challenging for me as I realized that music major was probably not something that I was a good fit for. And so that really caused me to struggle with, was the original call that I felt I had, somehow did I misinterpret that? Did God change his mind? Is God change? Does just all those kind of theological
Sure.
implications? And so I really had to set that kind of on a shelf a little bit to say like, okay, well, I don't know what this looks like, but I do know that I'm supposed to be doing these other things. So that was really my connection back to UBC.
Mm.
Was we started attending, and after several years of attendance, we had a special kind of summer emphasis on worship through the decades, and I was asked to help lead ironically, the 90s to now service, and so I did that, and that kind of began some of my ministry at UBC, leadership and providing guidance and worship. And so we've actually been doing that since that was 2003 is when we
Okay.
started, when I started helping lead worship at UBC. So,
I'm interested in all of the parallels thing here in the stories too of, for instance, like a rock climbing being an obstacle and
mm,
having to figure out the intelligent way to do that, the words you used. Um, you talked about your dad being a single parent. Sometimes that can be an obstacle. There's some adjustments that you talked about, calling, and when calling and perhaps expectations and all of those kind of things collide, and those kind of things. And obviously now your proficiency in your profession helps people in dealing with obstacles, and things like that. So let's look at it from a church centric idea. What about when there's not necessarily just conflict, but what about when one's person's idea, even their calling or of direction, does more than intersects with another person? In fact, it sometimes clashes. How have
mhm.
how have you handled that or seen that handled, or what advice would you have for people?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think for me, for the journey part of it was just a um, trying to be faithful to God's calling,
Mm.
even when it feels like I haven't heard from Him in a while, or I don't have clarity on a particular thing. I think sometimes what I learned was that God might call me to follow, And then I don't get that like a regular, like, oh yeah, follow me, follow me, follow me. It's not every moment. And so having to step out on faith and to follow the original calling until things evolve and change. So I think one, that's that, being faithful, even when it's hard or challenging or difficulty. And if we're using this kind of metaphor or analogy of, climbing or obstacles, it is this hope or belief in a summit or the accomplishment. The things that we hope for are the things that drive us forward, even when it's really tough or challenging right here in the moment. So that's been for me. But and to related to the people part of it, um, I think it's giving the same kind of grace that I would want to receive from somebody.
Right.
I have, I'm just thinking about, even during all this time, I've had conversations with colleagues, and, somebody says something, or it's an offhanded comment, or it, creates conflict or a clash. And my first reaction sometimes is to kind of come back at it, respond kind of more quickly with my personal reaction. And
Sure.
what I've had to do is, and I don't do this always, but what I've had to do is slow myself down and say, like, well, but there's a lot of things happening here. So if I'm going to make an assumption, let me err on the side of assuming that they're well intentioned, that something else is happening for them, that the encounter that we're having, if I had all the details, would make sense.
Okay.
And that when I do that, it helps slow me down enough to be curious about the other details that would then help us make sense of this conflict or the challenge, but would also help us highlight the things that we share, our agreements, the things that connect us in
Right.
very important and meaningful ways. And then that means there are a lot of other things that we realize don't matter at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Being quick to listen and slow to speak. You should write
Sure.
that down. I think that'll go. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I think that's from somewhere. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. That's for another podcast. That's for something else. Um, I want to close with this idea, and this is a little bit of self-serving. One of my favorite personal quotes by Frederick Buechner is that God's will for us is where the world's deep sadness and our great gladness meet. So the idea that what brings us joy,
Hmm.
God often gives us in order to meet the needs of
Yeah.
those around us. So,
Hmm.
what great gladness in your heart,
Hmm.
what great joy in your life have you seen God use to meet the needs of other people or even draw you closer to other people?
Yeah. Uh, Man, I can tell you probably lots of examples of those, but I want to pick two in
Okay.
particular. I think one for my career. So I feel like marriage and family therapy and the teaching and the supervision and the work with clients that I do is so personally enriching for me. I mean, it started because I was learning this information that helped me make sense of my family and help
Mm,
understand it. But it pretty quickly shifted to where I, in talking with people, can help assist change the way that they relate to each other and to their problems. And that is exhilarating because it takes hopeless and turns it into hopeful, and that people's lives, if they can connect to each other, that they can weather anything that happens. And so I love, love, love being able to do that. um, I think the other thing for me was, you know, being a worship leader. Um, for me, the act of worship and the planning and the musicality of it, are firstly my expression of worship. They it comes from my heart, and is me trying to submit to a God that covers all of my sins. And so then to get, just like with the marriage and family therapy thing, to get to help aid other people to encounter God in meaningful ways, is just so rich, and meaningful for me. And so that, I think, is where my joy helps meet the world's needs. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Canaan, thank you for your time. Appreciate it,
Yeah.
and appreciate what you do in and with UBC. And these are, like I said, this is our new normal in some ways, at least for now. So thanks for being a part of this. Appreciate it.
Sure. Yep. Anytime.